Sydney and Melbourne is a rivalry as old as time itself.
Oh, hey there, how are you?
Oh, hello. I'm not too bad. I just arrived from Sydney, actually.
Ew, you're from Sydney? Go away, go away. Melbourne is better than Sydney, okay? We actually have culture. We have laneways for crying out loud. Oh, and I wrote down some weird spaghetti mess like some toddler drew them, all right? Oh, and by the way, we have trams. You don't have trams. You don't have trams. Oh, and also, do you want takeaway late at night? Good luck with that. Everything's closed. What are you gonna do now, huh?
I'm sorry?
You've ruined my day. You have made a sworn enemy for life. Buy my kidneys. I want anyone buy my kidneys.
Oh, hey there, how are you?
Oh, sir, thank you so much. Please buy my kidneys, please.
I'm sorry, I actually only just arrived here from Melbourne. Oh, you're from Melbourne? Don't worry about it. If you're from Melbourne, you definitely can't afford to help me.
How do you figure?
Come on, no one would live in Melbourne unless they couldn't afford to live in Sydney. We're pretty much a better city in every way, shape and form. Our house prices are literally so expensive that you need to sell your organs in order to live here.
Is that really the flex you think it is? Just go away now. If I finally manage to sell both my kidneys today, I'll finally be able to afford that deposit on that $5 million, 2 square metre, half a bedroom unit 2 hours from Sydney CBD in Marsden Park. Well, there's one aspect of the Sydney versus Melbourne debate that perhaps should be discussed a little more. Which city has better public transport? Today, I've teamed up with YouTuber Philip Mallis from Melbourne. He has a great city planning channel based in Melbourne. In this video, I'll be talking about what Sydney's public transport does better than Melbourne's.
Hello! After you're done with Shareth's video, make sure you come over to my channel where I'll be talking about what makes Melbourne's public transport better than Sydney's.
I'm Shareth,
And I'm Philip.
and welcome to Building Beautifully. Before I continue, massive shout out to my monthly Ko-fi supporters. Please do consider supporting me over on Ko-fi if you can. Also, please subscribe if you haven't already, and do be sure to check out the rest of my channel, your go-to YouTube destination for all things city planning, after the video.
Now, I know what you're thinking. Melbourne's public transport must be better because we have trams. And that's sort of true. If you want to find out more, come on over to my channel.
But see, the idea that Melbourne's public transport is better just because of its trams is a bit of a misconception. They're great, don't get me wrong, but they don't necessarily make Melbourne superior outright. The first and perhaps most crucial aspect that Sydney does better than Melbourne is the frequency of its rail services. A turn up and go rail service is one where a commuter can comfortably show up to a train station at any time and just know that their next rail service is only a few minutes away at most. In Sydney, pretty much every station gets a train in both directions every 15 minutes, no matter what time of the day or day of the week. These aren't quite turn up and go frequencies, but they're honestly not too far off. There are some stations that get lower frequencies, but even those stations will never dip below every 30 minutes, even on the weekend or on public holidays.
Frequency is sadly where Melbourne loses to Sydney. At the average Melbourne suburban station out in the suburbs, you're getting trains about every 10 to 15 minutes in peak. But this can drop substantially in off-peak and during evenings to every 30 minutes or even longer. Most lines operate with 20-minute headways outside of peak times on weekdays, but this can vary a lot. While some stations closer to the city have great service of every 10 minutes or better, once you start heading out into the suburbs, you're looking at frequencies of up to every 40 minutes, particularly down some of the branch lines like Cranbourne or Pakenham. It's also very inconsistent. Coming up with an average small station for Melbourne is pretty difficult for these reasons. But let's look at Coolaroo. This station on the Craigieburn line gets a service to Flinders Street every 20 minutes on weekdays off-peak, but this drops to every 30 minutes after 8 PM on weekdays. Not great.
Now, let's take a look at how often services run in the peak at Sydney's major stations, such as this station, Hornsby Station. Pretty great frequencies, rarely less than every 4 minutes to Central. And again, services remain great off-peak too. On a Sunday night, you can get a train from Central all the way out to Penrith every 15 minutes. From Chatswood, my favourite station in Sydney, most nights there are services to Central almost every 5 minutes, all the way until midnight. Frequency is freedom. You need frequent services in order for people to feel comfortable with relying on them instead of driving. No one wants to wait 30 minutes for the next train.
Sadly, in Melbourne, that's exactly what you have to do. Box Hill, a suburb in our eastern suburbs, is the closest equivalent that Melbourne has to Chatswood in Sydney. On a Saturday night, Box Hill gets trains every 10 minutes up to around 7 PM, then every 20 until 8 PM, and after that only every 30. This really pales in comparison to Chatswood. This is despite them both being on 2 railway lines and being a similar distance from the CBD. Melbourne's rail network is really built around commuters travelling during peak times. Outside of this, it seems you're generally expected to take another mode of transport or just stay at home.
Sydney's network recognises that people want to make journeys all the time, even off-peak, for all sorts of reasons. Sydney's network comes much closer to being a turn-up-and-go rail service than Melbourne, although every 15 minutes at most stations is a bit far from that still. But wait, Sydney does have a turn-up-and-go rail service in the form of its rapid transit system, Sydney Metro. Sydney Metro's frequencies are even better than Sydney trains, with a metro arriving every 4 minutes on peak and every 10 minutes off-peak. Sydney Metro will have 113 kilometres of track by roughly the year 2032. Don't cancel the Sydney Metro West, Chris Mins, meaning Sydney's high-frequency services are only going to become even more widespread.
Meanwhile, Melbourne doesn't really have rapid transit. We have the Metro Tunnel opening in 2025, which is meant to result in turn-up-and-go frequencies across the network. But we haven't received many details from the state government on how exactly the timetables are going to change to achieve this. So I guess we'll just have to wait and see what happens.
Next, let's take a look at Sydney's City Circle and Melbourne's City Loop. Sydney's City Circle is pretty straightforward. All the lines go to Town Hall, all but the T4 go to Wynyard, and only the T2, T3 and T8 go to the rest.
The T2 generally goes anti-clockwise via the City Circle inner track, while the T8 generally goes clockwise via the City Circle outer track. The T3 alternates between these two tracks.
The biggest problem here, therefore, is that 3 lines must share 2 tracks, which limits capacity. However, this is being resolved with the Sydney Metro City and South West, which will redirect the T3 and free up capacity on the City Circle. Brilliant.
However, Melbourne's City Loop is so much more complicated than Sydney City Circle that you might need a degree to understand it. While we do have 4 tracks, these are shared between around 10 different lines, depending on the time of day and day of the week. Different trains also enter and exit the City Loop at different places. And to make matters worse, some lines even change direction in the middle of the day just to confuse you even more. This also leaves gaps between trains of up to 30 minutes in the middle of weekdays, so that trains can have time to reverse. That basically means that if you want to get home from, say, Melbourne Central to Box Hill at 12:45 PM on a weekday, bad luck, you'll have to wait half an hour for your train. Sorry. Another point to Sydney.
Sydney also wins when it comes to wayfinding. All of Sydney's modes of transport have distinct roundels that make it really clear where your transit stop is. The orange T is for trains, the cyan M is for metro, the blue B is for buses, the red L is for light rail, and the green F is for ferries. The modes of transport themselves are mostly coloured after the colours of the roundels, which is a brilliant touch, especially for tourists new to the city. Furthermore, major transport interchanges all use the same font and style of sign, which just makes everything very uniform, giving commuters confidence that they can trust the signage that they are following.
Compare this with Melbourne. When PTV was first established, there was a good effort to standardise and update a lot of our public transport signage. This included making consistent colours to identify different modes. We have blue for metropolitan trains, green for trams, orange for metropolitan and town buses, purple for V-Line trains and coaches, plus a bonus turquoise colour for ferries. While this has now been done pretty consistently across all vehicles, there are still a lot of problems with our wayfinding in general. This includes confusing or incorrect signs, and several different design suites all coexisting at the same time. Ultimately, I think it's just much easier to follow the distinct brightly coloured signs and roundels of Sydney than the adequately designed but less distinct signs of Melbourne.
But hey, Melbourne has trams at least. Yes, I have to hand that to Melbourne. It's not even a competition. Although, we do have ferries. Obviously, they don't compare at all to Melbourne's trams, and they're sort of treated more as a tourist attraction than a public transport service, but they are something.
But again, when it comes to buses, Sydney wins. Sydney's major bus routes mostly run up to every 5 minutes on peak, and every 15 minutes off peak. Minor routes generally don't dip below every 30 minutes. Admittedly, the bus network is much weaker in the suburbs, where you can find routes that only run once an hour or only during peak hour. However, bus priority infrastructure is also much stronger in Sydney. And indeed, newer intersections are generally required to incorporate bus lanes.
But it's worse in Melbourne, sadly. Buses that run every 15 minutes or better are not very common. On weekends and inter-peak, with some exceptions, most buses only run every 30 minutes or longer. While we do have some corridors that have turn up and go timetables of every 10 minutes or better, like Johnson Street and Hoddle Street, these are definitely the exception rather than the rule. Granted, our trams do pick up some of the slack, but our buses still need a lot of work.
Let's move on to railway electrification. Railway electrification involves powering trains with electricity as opposed to diesel engines like a truck. Electric railways are more energy efficient, have lower emissions and operating costs, and electric locomotives are quieter, more powerful and more reliable. Basically, electrification is king. Well, all the lines in metropolitan Sydney are electrified, and the lines to Lithgow, Wollongong and Newcastle are electrified too.
On the other hand, Melbourne has a couple of lines within its urban boundary that are not electrified, specifically the regional rail link that's serviced by V-Line and the Stony Point line. And there is no electrified railway anywhere outside Melbourne. This leads to reduced train speeds and increased local air pollution in booming suburbs like Tarneit. Another point to Sydney.
Sydney's express services are also much better. In the peak hour and sometimes even off-peak, you can get an express train from pretty much every major station in Sydney to Central. For example, services from Campbelltown to Central don't stop at every station on the TA, but instead skip a lot of the smaller stations, saving a commuter almost 15 minutes.
This isn't the case in Melbourne though, where most lines don't run express services at all, and those that do tend to have very confusing stopping patterns. The worst offender for this is the Belgrave-Lilydale line, which has 13 different stopping patterns on any given weekday, so good luck trying to work that out. We also have a lot of lines with only 2 tracks, which we still try to run express trains on. There are ones like the Hurstbridge line, which has 2 tracks and operates a small number of limited express trains from Ivanhoe and Clifton Hill. This means that there are several gaps of up to 15 minutes at intermediate stations during the morning peak. This is because without the extra tracks to overtake, like Sydney, other trains have to wait for the express trains to run through.
Now, last but not least, I've always said that public transport access should not be reserved for a special select few, but rather maximised to as many people as possible. And, well, Sydney just does TOD a lot better than Melbourne. This map shows how many dwellings Melbourne has built within 1 kilometre of a station since 2006. And this map shows how many dwellings Sydney has built. Sydney has well and truly recognised the need not only to decentralise outside of the CBD, but to house people in well-connected areas with great public transport.
Consequently, we've ended up with some excellent TOD, such as St Leonard's, Walleye Creek, and my personal favourite, Chatswood. For that matter, unlike Melbourne, Sydney also has a lot more railway interchanges outside of Central, which helps to create mini-centrals that help to promote TOD. On the other hand, Melbourne hasn't made as much of an effort to build near public transport, and that's a bit of a shame. This is further personified when comparing where both cities have built their shopping centres. Credit to Daniel Bowen for this excellent table. Only 3 of Melbourne's 10 biggest shopping centres are located next to a train station, as opposed to 9 of Sydney's. Melbourne simply does not seem to capitalise on its public transport the way that Sydney does.
When we first started talking about making this video, Philip and I came to a unanimous agreement over one thing. Sydney's public transport is better than Melbourne's, for all the reasons I've listed in this video. And Twitter largely agreed with us.
Do you know what it was like growing up in this family? Related to you? I mean, all I ever heard was Sydney this and Sydney that and Sydney, Sydney, Sydney. You were always just so f***ing special!
But with that said, it's not like Melbourne completely loses to Sydney by any means. So if you want to find out more, come on over to my channel, where Shareth and I will talk about what Melbourne does better in public transport than Sydney.
Good riddance, you filthy Sydney cider.
Buy my kidneys, please.